This is the fourth video in my series about rebuilding the gearbox on my Monarch lathe. If you haven't watched the first videos, I suggest you go back and watch those, and I hope you subscribe to follow along with the rest of this project.
I figured out what was causing my shifting problem, and it ended up not being inside the lathe. I'm still glad I took it out, took it apart because of all the sludge and metal filings in the bottom. But this shaft here gets turned by this dog thingy that, anyways, the thing moves back and forth, this rotates, and this is held onto the shaft with a taper pin. And the taper pin is egged out, so it doesn't tighten up. And let's see, let's get this going on the right way. It's the right way. And it also doesn't seat well in here. So if I put this together, like so, taper pin a light tap. This rotates on the shaft. And since it's all egged out, it'll never tighten up no matter how hard you, well, maybe if you jammed in the taper pin really, really hard, it would tighten up. But, yeah. But instead, I'm going to ream it bigger. I got a new taper pin reamer, and I'm going to ream it. And I also got new taper pins, because part of the problem is I think this taper pin is mushroomed over at the end, so it doesn't seat right. In here, if you put it in there, this upper side is loose and the lower side is tight. So, new taper pin to ream this back out again. Let's see. Let's get this. So that's how much slop there was in it. Let's to figure out how this should be rotated, I'm going to try to center it in the old, within the amount it's egged out. So I'm going to go all the way one direction, make a mark, and make a mark. Can't do it with the camera there, but I make 2 marks, and then, you know, get it centered in between them. I think I've got it centered. I've got marks here. I've moved it, you know, both directions and put marks in. I don't think it'll move much.
So the set screws in.
Oh, I should. That's a good idea. Tighten the set screw.
That's why you're here. Just hang back.
They said this reamer is supposed to be used by hand. I could do it by hand, but I want some speed because with this being an oval hole, I don't want to like push down and take a big chunk out. So I'm going to do it with a hand drill. I know reaming with a hand drill is not recommended, but I've got it on a low torque setting. So I should be able to get this reamed out without damaging anything. So I've got the hole reamed and a new taper pin. The set screw is loose, so this can rotate. Now when I put that in, give it a couple of taps. Now there's no movement in that at all, so I'll just need to trim the taper pin a little bit shorter, and we're good to go. One thing is, if your taper pins don't stick all the way through, you got to be really careful that you didn't mushroom the end when you drove it out, because if this end is fat, it'll just bind up in the taper and it won't seat right. So taper pins stick all the way through, or be real careful. I'm not quite sure how this is supposed to work. There's a key here, and this is peened over, and this is obviously broken here. So I can't tell though if this was all one piece and that peening was the end of this shaft or the end of this key, or if it was like a screw or something else put into there. And what that does is it stops the key from sliding out, which is kind of what I thought had happened, was that the key had slid out. But it turned out that that wasn't the case, so that stops the key from sliding out and escaping. So I'm going to try to figure out some way of keeping this key in place. It might just stay in with that bump of metal, but I want to make sure. So this might need to be fixed too. This was the shaft, and that was some of the motion that I was seeing when I looked in through the top. So it was moving here a little bit, but it was also moving down at the other end. So I try to get that straightened out. So I put in a new key because the other one was worn, and I don't have a good way of holding it in. They had something in the back peened over, and there's a stub broken off the other key. So I'm not sure exactly how they had it together. Perhaps they had a tail sticking off the key and then they peened it over, and that's what was supposed to hold the key in place. I think what I'm going to do is drive this key in a little bit further and just put a little TIG weld bead right across there, and that should stop the key from coming out and hold everything in place. Obviously not weld the whole thing because it still needs to come apart and go back together again, but that's my current plan. Been better, maybe not, was to drill a small hole through here with a roll pin to hold in that key. But as it is, that's what I've got. So now I'm going to file that down smooth, and it should be good to go. So I'm going to test fit this shifting fork before I cut the pins or anything, because there's a chance this might not be timed right after dealing with the egged out hole. So I got to get it all in place and see how it fits and see how it operates. So that means I also need to get the reversing shaft in. I think the shift mechanism is now working correctly for the forward reverse feed. Let's see, turn this. It engages all the way. What was happening before was if I happened to try to engage it here, rather than engaging this, it would slide, the little fork would slide on the shaft, and the handle would continue to move. But then when this finally spun around and engaged a little bit, it would spin around and try to engage, but it would only be engaged, say, that far, and then it would force itself to disengage. It would never fully engage until you went completely the other direction, pushed down really hard, took the slop out of the handle, then went back the other way and got it to engage all the way. So that's what was going on with this. And now there's no slop in it, so that hopefully should be working perfectly fine. One interesting thing about this lathe is you can reverse the direction of the lead screw and the feed on the fly. So you can feed in and feed out, or you can feed across, then take your tool out of your threads, back up, and then feed with your lead screw back away, never disengaging the half nuts, which is sort of interesting. What allows you to do that is there's only one drive dog on this gear, so there's only one place it can engage. And since this is a 1-to-1 gear ratio between this and the headstock, it'll always come back in indexed in exactly the same spot. You won't be out by a half a revolution or something like that. So like, it wouldn't work with this shift dog for the main shaft because it's got 5 places, 5 ways it could go together, whereas this one only has one. So yeah, that's pretty neat. So hopefully this all works. I have to find out soon. I've got shim stock for the headstock bearing, and I've got Loctite, and I'm going to try freezing the bearing and heating the casing and trying to put it all together with everything, and hopefully that'll be fairly soon. I can get that together. So stay tuned for that. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and to follow me with the rest of this project. Hopefully it'll get together soon.